There's always been an intense rivalry between Boeing and SpaceX. Boeing, a giant company and a leader in the space industry, versus SpaceX, a startup space company founded by an ambitious billionaire. Elon Musk believed that they had better technology and could defeat the industry's father figure. And as always, he was right. Strap yourself in, because today's video, we're going to be taking a deep dive into where this rivalry all began and how SpaceX defeated Boeing. Welcome to Elon Musk Zone. To find out how all of this began, we must go back a few steps. Every rivalry has an origin story, and this one is no exception. It all began in 2010, when NASA announced the Commercial Crew Program. The goal was to develop the most cost-effective, innovative, and safe way to transport people to the ISS that could eventually lead to the availability of commercial human spaceflight. The program would provide financial assistance so that NASA could step away from operating, owning, and maintaining spacecraft and instead buy seats on capsules. It was a win-win situation for both parties. In 2011, NASA opened the competition to choose the firm that would be responsible for manned flights. Over the next 2 years, the agency received successful proposals from SpaceX, Boeing, Blue Origin, Sierra Nevada, among many others. After years of testing and reviews, the two winners emerged in 2014, Boeing and SpaceX. Boeing has been at the forefront of aerospace engineering for years. It's not only a firm with almost a century of history and the largest in the aerospace market worldwide, but it also had been responsible for driving commercial aviation for decades and building some of the most advanced aircraft. Boeing has also had multiple contracts with NASA and the US government. So saying Boeing is a giant of aerospace engineering would be an understatement. SpaceX, on the other hand, is a company founded just in 2002 by billionaire Elon Musk. One of its main goals is to minimize the cost of space travel so that humans can colonize the Moon and Mars. The company would only go into orbit in 2008 with Falcon 1 and the International Space Station in 2012. SpaceX has also been transporting cargo and supplies to the ISS since 2012, giving it plenty of experience hoisting spacecraft into orbit and having them meet up and dock with the station. The company has also been long known for repurposing their supplies, including a 125,000-gallon liquid nitrogen tank that an employee discovered destroyed at an old abandoned Cape Canaveral launch site. But SpaceX cannot completely be dismissed as a beginner in the aerospace industry. When it came to flying astronauts, SpaceX had an advantage. It has been transporting cargo and supplies to the ISS since 2012, giving it plenty of experience hoisting spacecraft into orbit and having them meet up and dock with the station. Its Falcon 9 rocket now has a lot of heritage, flying missions not just for NASA, but also for the commercial sector. It was also possibly better fitted to execute within the constraint of NASA's contract, which drives contractors to be more efficient. Boeing, on the other hand, was used to cost-plus contracts, which allowed for more spending and longer timetables on large government projects, like its Space Launch System rocket. When the funding was given, Boeing received the lion's share, earning $4.2 billion, and SpaceX received $2.6 billion for the same work. How is that fair? It isn't, but as they say, all's fair in love and war. With the approved contracts and funding, a new space race between the two companies began. Even though Musk has had several titles of being the first before, this was completely different. It wasn't just a battle for bragging rights. Significant government dollars were on the line. Designing a spacecraft to fly humans is an enormous challenge, and both companies have faced their share of setbacks and delays, causing the deadlines to be pushed back to the following year. For the test, SpaceX was going with its trusted Crew Dragon capsule and Boeing with its Starliner CST-100. Finally, in 2019, the uncrewed flight test took place. It was the final test before delivering astronauts to the ISS, and SpaceX fulfilled its promise. SpaceX not only performed the uncrewed test, but also a spaceflight with humans aboard their Crew Dragon. That kind of mission is something the more expensive Starliner has not been able to pull off. SpaceX's successful launch was a major milestone for the company. Boeing's problems, on the other hand, only seemed to escalate. The company's test flight went terribly wrong from the moment it reached orbit. Some 20 minutes after liftoff, the capsule was supposed to fire its engines to reach the space station. The engine firing didn't happen on time, and the Starliner was unable to reach the station. The spacecraft's onboard computers were off by 11 hours, causing the autonomous spacecraft to believe it was on a separate mission. A software glitch involving the separation of the crew module from the service module was also discovered, which would have led to an in-space collision. Although Boeing landed the spacecraft a few days later, it never achieved its goal of reaching the ISS. After a thorough investigation, NASA recommended a total of 80 changes. Boeing will conduct a second test, which will take place by the end of this year, meaning its first launch with the crew wouldn't happen until 2021. Now, for a company that big with that many years of experience, this was a step in the wrong direction. More recently, people were surprised at the difference in pricing between SpaceX and Boeing. A NASA Inspector General report found that the average cost of Boeing's Starliner would be $90 million per astronaut, which is significantly more than SpaceX's $55 million a seat on its Dragon capsule. This was a major issue, given that one of the commercial crew program's goals was to assist NASA in lowering the cost of their missions. Musk took to Twitter to show his disappointment. "This doesn't seem right," Musk wrote, adding, "meaning not fair that Boeing gets so much more for the same thing." But Boeing has denied most of the claims, stating that NASA failed to include the extra cargo capacity they were giving, bringing the total cost per seat to nearly $70 million. Boeing justified their higher price by saying that they had less time than SpaceX to develop their spacecraft, which was true. SpaceX actually did not win the first phase of the commercial crew program. They entered the second phase and won the funding. Now, the only reason they were able to do this was because of COTS, the Commercial Orbital Transportation Service. This program was announced a few weeks before the commercial crew program. Unlike the commercial crew program, the companies chosen weren't supposed to transport passengers to space. Instead, they were expected to design a spacecraft that would deliver goods to the ISS. Since SpaceX won the program, they had already received funds to create their Dragon capsule, which would be the predecessor of the Crew Dragon. So even when they did not acquire money in Phase 1 of the commercial crew development, they were still able to get into Phase 2 and win the funding. That's because they had to make minor changes to the Dragon capsule to make it capable of transporting astronauts to space. So unlike Boeing, SpaceX didn't have to start from scratch and hence got a head start. So yes, Boeing was right. SpaceX did have a head start in the race, and Boeing had a shorter time span to work with. But even though Boeing is correct, they lost their right to complain when they took the larger chunk of money with the higher seat price. Boeing was behind schedule, but they were ahead in terms of money, which should have been used to get more resources. When the contract was awarded in 2014, nobody could have imagined that 6 years later, it would be SpaceX that would win the race. One was an established giant with a legacy in aerospace that stretched back more than 100 years and a hand in almost every major moment in NASA's history. The other was a newcomer that was mocked as nothing more than a delusional billionaire's fantasy. But Musk did everything he could to cross the finish line first. He slashed production costs, built a reusable spacecraft from the ground up, and beat out a 100-year-old aviation giant in the process. The Crew Dragon launch marked the end of an era in which only government-owned spacecraft were capable of making giant leaps for mankind in space. And we can't wait to see what other space innovations Musk has up his sleeve. Do you think Boeing can catch up to SpaceX? Tell us in the comments below.